Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to News Dose. And I know it's been very difficult to get your hands on a PlayStation 5. These things sell out incredibly fast, and I mean, if you really start to think about it, it's been nearly 1 year since the PlayStation 5 launched, and I mean, it's still in that situation where this thing sells out in seconds as soon as it goes up online. It really has been insane, and this is a big reason that the PlayStation 5 right now is the fastest selling console of all time. But we actually have some good news here, because it looks like PlayStation is going to be absolutely flooding the market throughout the rest of the year, and this is going to give you ample opportunity to snag yourself a PlayStation 5 throughout the rest of 2021 and early into 2022. So we're going to go over that today, as well as Xbox Game Pass, because Xbox Game Pass is helping out a couple of different games here just generate a lot more revenue, including a PlayStation game. Yes, this is an actual thing, but it does look like a PlayStation first-party game has significantly benefited from that Xbox Game Pass release, so we will go over that as well. On to our first topic of the day, though. We actually have a new game to talk about, or actually a new remake to talk about, because the old classic 90s platformer Zool is going to be making a return to Steam later this month. Yeah, it seems like this game right here getting a remake is a bit of a surprise for a lot of people, as Zool did originally release back in 1992 for the Amiga home computer. It was later then ported over to other platforms, including the Super Nintendo, Mega Drive, Master System, the Game Gear, Game Boy, and so on and so forth. And even though this is a little bit more of an obscure title, apparently it was popular enough to get a sequel with Zool 2. So, I mean, there seems to be a lot of love for this game from fans from the 90s. Now, I never really played the original game, but I have been seeing a lot of positive reaction over this Zool Redimensioned remake. You know what? Based off of the gameplay trailer here, it does look like it's going to be a fun game. I like the visual art style of it, as it's very colorful. It seems like it's a fast-paced game and kind of reminds me of Sonic a little bit. And you can also jump across walls, and it just looks like a nice, fun, retro-style platformer. So, you know, I might actually check this one out. And again, it does release later in August on Steam. Let me know in the comments below, though, on whether or not you played the original Zool, and are you looking forward to the remake? Let me know. Now, we also got some good news about the Ascent, which released directly into Xbox Game Pass late last month. Now, we'll kind of come back to that here in just a second, but since this game released, it has been a little bit polarizing. It did launch with some bug issues, and critics were a little harsh with it, giving it a 73 overall score on Metacritic. But from what I've seen from fans, most fans do seem to really like this game. Outside of the bug issues, people seem to really be having a lot of fun with it. And the good news here is that so far, the Ascent has performed incredibly well. Yeah, so let's just go ahead and check this out. Curve Digital posted this up over on their website and said, Curve achieved its largest ever opening weekend sales revenue this weekend, generating more than $5 million and securing the #1 slot in the Steam global charts for Neon Giant's The Ascent, firmly positioning the indie title as a AAA competitor. So that is very high marks for the Ascent. Not only is it generating a lot of money, but it also secured the #1 slot in the Steam global charts, which is incredibly impressive. I think that just kind of shows you the amount of hype that there was for the Ascent, and the word of mouth that's just been absolutely carrying this game. This is something that I started to notice last month when you all voted it as being your most anticipated game for the month of July. You all seem to be very excited about the Ascent, and that was a trend that I really noticed, was that most of the people that was talking about the Ascent online was Xbox Game Pass subscribers. And this is kind of the power of Xbox Game Pass. Here we see this game heavily benefit from releasing directly in the Xbox Game Pass, as it just gets a lot more exposure as people continuously talk about it. And that translated to success over on Steam. They did note that the Ascent secured the #1 slot in the Steam global charts, and I think that is very telling right there. That's an incredible achievement to pull off for a smaller independent game like this that didn't really have a lot of marketing. And again, this is something that we are seeing time and time again with Xbox Game Pass. A lot of these day one Xbox Game Pass titles have reported success shortly after release. And this is something that I have said before, but Xbox Game Pass doesn't just help out these games on the Xbox platform, but on occasions like this, it also helps them on other platforms as well. Word of mouth is a very powerful thing, and that is something that Xbox Game Pass can really help out with. Nonetheless, though, big congrats to the Ascent, Curve Digital, and Neon Giant. Did a great job with the Ascent, and with that extra money, hopefully they can kind of fix some of the problems that it's currently having. This is a good title with a lot of potential, so let's just kind of see what happens here. Now, speaking of Xbox Game Pass, Sony's quarterly conference call for investors and analysts was today, and they had some very interesting statements here. We're going to kind of get into the real exciting stuff here in just a moment, especially if you're looking for a PlayStation 5. But they also talked a little bit about some of their recent PlayStation releases, including games that released on other platforms besides just PlayStation, and this one really stood out. So let's just go and take a look at what they had to say. Sales of first-party software decreased compared to the same quarter of the previous fiscal year when The Last of Us Part 2 was a big hit, but sales of all the titles we released during the quarter, including Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart and MLB The Show 21, exceeded our expectations. Thanks in part to strong add-on sales, MLB The Show 21 contributed significantly to sales and profit during the quarter. We have begun to release our first-party titles on platforms other than PlayStation, and MLB The Show 21 was one such title, which followed up on the initial success we had with the PC versions of Horizon Zero Dawn and Days Gone. Now, there's actually a few different things that you can take from this statement. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, as well as MLB The Show 21, did exceed their expectations, which is really good news to hear. I am personally a big fan of Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, as I do think it's one of the best exclusive next-generation titles that's released so far, so I'm really happy that that one is just doing so well so far. But something else that they do very specifically mention here is that MLB The Show 21 did contribute significantly to sales and profits during the quarter. And a big part of that was because they did release it on other platforms besides just PlayStation. Now, they didn't flat out mention exactly what platforms these were, but it's very clear here with the addition of Xbox and, more importantly, releasing directly into Xbox Game Pass. Yeah, that was very beneficial for MLB The Show 21. Now, this isn't really a major surprise or anything like that because, releasing on more platforms equals more money, but it is nice to see that that Xbox Game Pass inclusion has been very beneficial for The Show 21. It is kind of strange to see a big PlayStation game like this have success over on Xbox, but I mean, you kind of see the same thing with Minecraft as that releases on Nintendo platforms and PlayStation platforms, and this was just the right decision to make to bring this over to Xbox. Now, based off everything that we know, this was more of MLB's decision than it was PlayStation's, but it does look like PlayStation is heavily benefiting from this by, they're just making more money. They do mention here that it's thanks in part to strong add-on sales, and that is something that Xbox can really help out with, especially with that Xbox Game Pass release. MLB The Show 21 does have microtransactions, and I'm sure several Xbox Game Pass subscribers are, they're buying into those microtransactions. But either way, this is the second game that we've talked about today that has benefited from releasing directly into Xbox Game Pass, and interestingly enough, this is a PlayStation first-party title. Now, I think the other thing about this specific quote, though, and they do actually kind of talk about this a little bit later on as well, but yes, this just kind of reconfirms once again that PlayStation will be bringing more of their first-party games over to PC. They do mention both Horizon Zero Dawn as well as Days Gone having initial success on PC, and they also did mention Nixxes later on as well. This is the studio that they recently acquired that is well known for their PC port output. So pretty much every time that we hear PlayStation publicly talk about this, it just seems like they're more and more committed to releasing some of their games on PC, and that is exactly what that Nixxes acquisition is going to be all about. They're going to probably port several PlayStation 4 games to PC over the coming years. Nonetheless, it does look like PlayStation's had a pretty good quarter, and actually, let's go ahead and jump into the next bit of news here, and this is the really good, exciting news, especially if you're looking to buy yourself a PlayStation 5. I know it's been very hard getting your hands on a PlayStation 5 as they just sell out so incredibly fast, but here we do have good news because Sony claims it has secured enough components to put 12 million more units on the market by March 31st of 2022. In other words, that means that PlayStation, since launch, would have produced 22 plus million PlayStation 5s, which is just absolutely insane. I mean, we're talking about less than a year and a half, they would have already sold 22 plus million PlayStation 5s, which is just... And I said this yesterday, they are doing just such a phenomenal job at flooding the market, and that right there is exactly what you want to hear, especially if you're still looking to get a PlayStation 5. Yes, the PlayStation 5 has already sold 10.1 million units worldwide, making it the fastest selling console of all time, but it still has not met that initial demand. That is very telling on just how popular the PlayStation brand is and how much hype there is that surrounds this specific console. And the good news here is that it does look like you're going to have plenty of chances to snag yourself a PlayStation 5 throughout the rest of the year and then moving into 2022. Now, with that said, I still think the PlayStation 5 is still going to be incredibly difficult to get, especially during the holiday season. That's whenever a lot of people are going to be really trying to buy these all at once. So it's not going to get necessarily easier, but this is still a very good sign, and it does show that you're going to have plenty of opportunities to grab a PlayStation 5. And the way to really kind of look at this right now is that the quicker this PlayStation 5 sells, the quicker they reach, let's say, 22 million or 30 million or whatever it is, the quicker they meet that initial demand. Once that initial demand is met, then it will become easier to grab a PlayStation 5. And that's what we really want to see. So I'm kind of hopeful that once we reach 2022, because PlayStation has been doing just such a phenomenal job of flooding the market with PlayStation 5s, I'm hoping it becomes a little bit easier to get a PlayStation 5 once we get to 2022. So I'm going to cross my fingers for that. But this is also beneficial for game developers as well. This is something that not a lot of people are talking about, but the quicker the PlayStation 5 sells, the better these next-generation exclusives will sell. Games like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart will continue to sell as more people buy a PlayStation 5, and for that matter, we could just see more next-generation exclusives once the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series gets more of an install base. So you do need to keep that in mind as well, especially if you want more of these next-generation exclusives. Regardless, it's really nice to hear that PlayStation is doing everything that they can possibly do to just, again, flood the market with the PlayStation 5. Now, before I go, we also may have gotten a small leak for Halo Infinite, as it looks like the release window may have been leaked out in an unexpected way online. Yeah, this is coming from the Xbox Mexico Twitter account, where they posted about their Krispy Kreme collaboration. Yeah, let's just go and check this out. Why wait until November if we can start the festivities now? Xbox Mexico and Krispy Kreme celebrate 20 years of Master Chief with a special edition donut of Halo Infinite, available July 30th. So there you have it. It does look like, based off of this tweet at the very least, that Halo Infinite is set for release sometime in November. And I don't really think that that's necessarily a major surprise. A lot of these big games do release right around that November time, and I think for the most part, most people did seem to peg Halo Infinite for a November release or possibly December, but it is kind of nice to narrow it down just a little bit further into November. Of course, that is assuming that this information is accurate. Something that Phil Spencer did mention about Halo Infinite before is that they do have Halo Infinite planned for a holiday release, but they're kind of waiting for other games to reveal their release date before making anything official. And as soon as I heard that, I immediately thought about Battlefield 2042 and then Call of Duty. So I think Xbox is going to continue to wait until we get official release dates for those games, and then we'll hear a release date for Halo Infinite, because obviously all three of these are big first-person shooters and they are direct competition to one another. Yes, Xbox benefits from the success of Call of Duty and Battlefield, but obviously they're not going to want to just push all of these titles together all at once, as one might struggle. We saw something like that with Titanfall 2 years ago, as it released in a very crowded time, and it never really quite made up for that initial launch. So yeah, I think without a doubt, Xbox has a release window set for Halo Infinite, and I wouldn't doubt at all if that is November. But until we start to get release dates for these other games, I think they're just going to continue to hold off on actually announcing what a specific release date is for Halo Infinite. I do think that that's the smart approach here, and let's say November is too crowded. I don't think that there would be a problem with just pushing Halo Infinite to a December release. For the time being, though, I really wouldn't be too surprised if their internal plans is to release Halo Infinite in November, but at the same time, I'm not going to take this leak as confirmation or anything like that. And that's just what I'm kind of saying here. On to the poll of the day, though. I wanted to go ahead and talk about Final Fantasy today, as we do have several Final Fantasy games in development. You have Final Fantasy Origins, you have Final Fantasy 16, and there's also those new Final Fantasy HD Pixel Remaster games as well. Why they're not on consoles, I really don't know. But there's always this split among the fan base. Do you prefer the action-based Final Fantasy games, which most of the modern releases have been going in that direction, or do you prefer the turn-based games, which is really how this franchise started in the first place? So which do you prefer? And interestingly enough here, it does look like most of you all prefer the more modern approach with action-based combat. And I can definitely understand that, because I do think that action-based combat is a little bit more approachable, definitely for the mass public, than what turn-based RPGs are. Turn-based, of course, is a little bit slower paced, and you have to use a little bit more strategy. And a lot of people do prefer that approach where you just jump in and you just beat everything up. So I can definitely understand all that. With that said, though, I have to say for myself, I do kind of miss turn-based RPGs sometimes. We don't really get a lot of these big budget turn-based RPGs anymore, though I do think at the same time that Final Fantasy does an excellent job with action-based combat. In specific, I really liked what they did with Final Fantasy VII Remake. It was a nice mix of both action as well as having that turn-based element alongside it, because you could actually freeze time and use different magic attacks. I really did like that aspect of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and you could also switch the game modes completely over to turn-based if you want. So I do like what they did with Final Fantasy VII Remake. And well, thankfully, Square Enix also does have a really good turn-based RPG that old school Final Fantasy fans should really be paying attention to, and that is Bravely Default. Bravely Default essentially is your old school Final Fantasy games, all but in name. So, I mean, if you haven't played those games already, definitely do yourself a favor and check those games out. They're really, really good. But yeah, I do like both the turn-based combat as well as the action. Some of my favorite RPGs of all time are Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII, and Final Fantasy IX. Those are just absolutely excellent games. And then I also like the more modern approach, and I did enjoy Final Fantasy 15, and Final Fantasy VII Remake is just amazing. So yeah, I do like both styles here. And you know what? I kind of agree with what Black Storm said about this topic. Over in the comments, Black Storm said, "I chose C results because I couldn't in good conscience choose between the two. I love them both equally." And you know what, Black Storm? I completely understand where you're coming from here, because I have a hard time choosing between the two here as well. I really do just adore both, but it's been really interesting to see what your all's thoughts are about this specific topic. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode, but if you liked the video, don't forget the bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.